the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. He told on them, in other words. Now, Israel loved Joseph, that is, Jacob loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Sounds like familiar territory when people can't speak peaceably to their kin. Jumping to verse 12, now Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel, that is Jacob, said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. Joseph answered, here I am. So Jacob said to him, go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me. So Jacob sent Joseph from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, what are you seeking? I'm seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? The man said, they've gone away, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. Reuben, he was the eldest, said to them, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, thinking that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The story goes on to indicate that Reuben, the eldest, who intended to return Joseph to his dad, was away for the moment that the traders came by, and he came back and he was distraught. And so they concocted a plan to put blood on Joseph's coat, take it back to his dad, and tell him that Joseph had been torn by an animal and had died. Well, a great man, a titan really of our age, was recently laid to rest. He was small in stature, but a giant in influence. John Lewis, Georgia representative in the House of Congress, succumbed to cancer after a long, illustrious, provocative, and compassionate career in public service. Lewis was eulogized by 3 former presidents, Bush, Clinton, and Obama, at his funeral, along with friends, family, and colleagues. He was remembered as someone willing to lay his life down for others, for the sake of telling the truth, for the sake of justice for all, for the sake of equal voting privileges for everyone. That meant being ready to get into what he called good trouble. what the Bible calls suffering for what is doing right. One thing that came clear in the funeral service, if you had a chance to see it, I hope you did. We can certainly send you a link to it. It was a very inspiring service. One thing came to clear was how much of Lewis's work was grounded in his Christian faith. Each of the three presidents that spoke cited passages of Scripture in seeking to honor him rightly. We learned that as a young boy, he enjoyed preaching to his chickens. That was his first public act of witness. And Tammy got a book this week, a beautiful children's book about Lewis preaching to the chickens. Apparently, he was so good at it and so passionate about it that his family called him Rev. But he never did seek ordination to ministry. His friend Martin Luther King Jr. did, but Lewis's witness was lived out and spoken as a layperson, but still grounded in what God requires of all of us: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And advocating for that got him into trouble repeatedly. When and where have you and I suffered for doing the right thing or speaking truth in the face of resistance? The Bible story of Joseph comes to mind when we think of people whose truthfulness got them into a heap of trouble. We learn right at the outset of the story that we read that Joe told Dad when his brothers misbehaved, and his brothers hated him for it. Who likes a tattletale anyway? Of course, tattletales are hated precisely because they tell the truth about things that we'd rather stay hidden. Then, to make matters worse, Joe gets this special coat from dear old Dad. None of his brothers get one, only he. A reward for being the child of his old age, the text says. How about maybe for being a tattletale? Who knows? His brothers hate him all the more for this special coat. The King James Bible calls it a coat of many colors, the inspiration for the story that we all know from Broadway, Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Apparently the Hebrew really doesn't tell about colors. And so our modern translation that we read from the New Revised Standard calls it a long coat with sleeves. Boring. Try to write a musical about that, eh? Well, whatever its color, length, or style, it infuriated his brothers because it was special. Only he got it, no one else. Well, we know about Joe's dreams. We'll call him Joe, even though we didn't read them today. Basically, Joe dreamed that one day he would rule his father and brothers. He, the upstart. In those days, the eldest son always got all the stuff and power from dear old Dad when Dad died. But Joe dreamed that both Dad and his older brothers would look to him as their provider somewhere down the line, rather than vice versa. I got to say, if my little brother ever dreamed anything like that about me and told me so, I'd have hated him too. In fact, if he had such a dream, he never told me. He had the good sense to keep it shut. But not Joe. Joe just blabbed it out to his brothers. Hey, this is what I dreamed about you. Isn't that something? Apparently, he couldn't keep his mouth shut when it came to telling the truth. He tells the truth, all of it, all the time. Lets the chips fall where they may. And his brothers hate him still more. We are way too smart always to tell the truth, aren't we? Because it gets us in trouble. So when Dad asks Joe to go to a faraway place to check in on his brothers, they're out with the flocks, see how they're doing, Joe must know how much he is hated. He must know that it's not safe for him to go. Still, he goes, cheerfully, willingly, immediately. He has an opportunity along the way to save his skin when he learns the brothers aren't where they're supposed to be. He goes to Shechem and they're not there. He could have turned around, gone back to the safety of Dad's house, but instead he keeps looking, finds a guy, says, hey, do you know where my brothers might be? And he says, yeah, I heard something about going down to Dothan. And so Joe heads there, and sure enough, there they are. and his brothers seize him, just as we imagined they might. Finally, they think we can get even. They plot to kill him. But his oldest brother, Rube, stops them, even though he's the one who stands to lose the most if Joseph's dreams come true. He asks them to throw him into a pit instead. Our text points out the pit has no water. It's no place where life can be sustained. Soon he'll die there, but of course Rube plans to pull him out and restore him to dad. But wait, somebody's coming down the horizon. It's a band of traders. Company is on the horizon. Good company for the brothers. A band that is taking a bunch of cargo to sell in Egypt. And so the brothers call out to them, "We've got something valuable to add to your caravan. We have a strapping young man to sell to you. He'll be worth something to you for sure." Jude is the name of the brother who negotiates the sale. 20 pieces of silver, deal closed. Hundreds of years later, another dude named Jude negotiates a sale for a strapping young man for 30 pieces of silver. Another truth teller that kept upsetting everyone. You know the story. So Joe's taken to Egypt, where he's bought by a guy looking for a house slave. The guy's wife tries to seduce Joe. Joe resists. She cries rape, and he gets thrown into the slammer, where he languishes, forgotten. So here's the point. How many times can someone get knocked down and get back up again? John Lewis said he got arrested around 50 times for the good trouble he got into. You'd think he'd learn, especially after being nearly killed by a policeman in the march on Selma. John thought at that moment he was dying, but he didn't. Now, Joe's story is set in a longer story of what we call the patriarchs. God promised Abraham, his great-grandfather, that his family would be great and bless the whole world, and God passed along that promise to Abraham's son Isaac, who didn't deserve it because he wasn't Abraham's firstborn son, and he nearly lost his life at a young age. Then God passed it on to Isaac's son Jacob, who likewise didn't deserve it because he also was not the firstborn son, and he likewise was also nearly killed at a young age. Now, Jacob's son Joseph, the great-grandson of Abraham, who was beaten down more than any of them, eventually saved the family from starvation. So God's promise to the family could be fulfilled. Pampered by dad, despised by his brothers, cast down into a pit where he'd be left to die, thrown into prison on false charges, forgotten in the dungeon. Yet Joe never gave up being truthful, no matter how much it got him into trouble. Joe was, in a word, irrepressible. It's a great word. No matter how things got, he never gave up, all because of his bedrock trust in God, just like John Lewis. Where have you been put down, cast down, trampled on? The Bible story tells us that often it is precisely from such places of defeat and loss that God stirs us up and equips us to fulfill our destiny. President Obama, in eulogizing John Lewis, quoted from the testimony of St. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Paul says that he was afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. So I invite us, beloved, to hear the word of the Lord to those whose kin have turned against them. God isn't done with you. To those who have been cast into a pit, cut off from all that they hold precious. God isn't done with you. Sent to work for next to nothing, far away from their qualifications and dreams, God isn't done with you. Ostracized for saying and doing the right thing, even when it's unpopular, God isn't done with you.